In this video, I will show you how to screen and protect yourself from unrepresented buyers. I created a couple forms you can use. I will link to them in the description. You can download them in Word format so you can edit them. You can put in your own logo, put in whatever information you want, use it at your own disposal. I made it to share it. So I'll link to those. Now, all of this started with a comment I got that got me thinking. And this person asks two questions. What do you do if an unrepresented buyer refuses representation and writes an offer on some non-car form? How do you proceed? Well, if a buyer is unrepresented, then I welcome them to write an offer on whatever they want, some template from the internet. They can pay an attorney to draft it. They can write it up on their own. They can write it on a cocktail napkin. As long as it has some basic terms and a signature, I will create a counteroffer to clean it up. What I won't be doing is sharing a blank car form with them or offering guidance. And if someone tells you to share a car form, ignore them. They're weak, they're caving in, they're offering free services, and you're not supposed to share forms that you are paying for. The next part says, what is to stop an agent without a buyer-broker agreement from sending their client to view properties at an open house, or even just scheduling a showing with the listing agreement for that matter, without a PSRA form? They could have an agreement to sign the BRBC form if the client has interest. This agent's saying, what if some agent that's afraid to have their buyer client or too weak to have their buyer client sign a representation agreement, what's to stop them from sending these buyers out on their own to claim that they're unrepresented and then have you open up listings, your listing specifically, and show it to them only to have another agent write an offer? Well, there's no perfect solution, but I think I have a pretty decent one. So let me show you a couple different options. Now, I used to have a property showing agreement that I created, and I would not show a property to a buyer unless they signed it. And this form, which is now obsolete, but I've made a new version, it states that if the buyer proceeds with this property, because we're taking into consideration that I drove there, I'm opening it up, I'm doing the tour, I'm spending my time driving, showing the property, using tools I pay for like the MLS or forms or whatever. I'm showing up to show this property. So you buyer must have me represent you should you decide to proceed with this. And this was to prevent buyers, which historically have always had they'll have an agent open a property, or they'll work with a buyer's agent and have the buyer's agent show all these properties only to have their uncle or whatever write an offer. And that was a very common way for a buyer's agent to do a lot of free work only to get shafted in the end. So we had this property showing agreement, and I took it so seriously that I once had buyers drive almost an hour to see a property. They refused to sign it, and I left them right there outside the property all locked up because they refused to sign it. So now we have a new version. So let me tell you something. If a buyer doesn't sign this, because it's not so much that we're using this form because we want them to sign some contract to sue a buyer or something. It's that you're screening buyers. You're making sure that you're preventing yourself from doing lots of free work and getting shafted later. And this is a way to smoke out phony buyers and their lazy agents that are going to exploit you. So I created this. This is called the unrepresented buyer form, and you can put the property address. Now, here's a scenario in which you would use it. You have a listing. You're the listing agent. A buyer calls you and says, hi, I'd like to schedule an appointment to see your property. You tell that buyer, all right, that's fine. You of course ask if they're represented. You offer representation if they're not. If they're not, you send them this form. You email them this form. You text this form. You get it to them however you can. And I'll explain why as we go through it. It's very short. It's one page. Now, a buyer might reject it. That's fine. That's what we want. Again, we're smoking out the buyers that are going to exploit you. So I'll explain how all this works because I have a few different scenarios, and how the buyer reacts is going to dictate how you proceed. You put the property address here. You send this notice. A buyer is not required to have professional representation to purchase real estate. Okay, you're letting them know, hey, you're unrepresented. That's okay. Then it says, broker commissions are not set by law and fully negotiable. That is magical verbiage on the NAR settlement that you need to have on your docs just to protect you and show that you're being in compliance. You're a realtor in compliance. Now here's the good stuff. Okay. So prospective buyer, and identified as the buyer, hereby declares that they do not have professional representation and have not entered into a representation agreement. Okay. So the buyer has already told you they're unrepresented. They don't want representation. They just want to see the property. They want you to open it up. Fine. You've declared that. Here it is in writing. And prospective buyer acknowledges the agent, that's you opening up the property, is allocating time and resources and performing broker duties to facilitate the showing of the property, and therefore, should the buyer choose to elect representation, then buyer shall be represented by agent's brokerage for the purchase of the property. Now, if a unrepresented buyer has a problem with this, that right there would be a red flag, because I would wonder why. You've declared you're unrepresented. We've established that we're both in agreement here on this form that you're not required to have a representative. But should you decide one, well, then we're going to represent you. Now, a buyer, in theory, could say, a buyer could make up any reason and say, well, I don't like this agent, or this person was rude to me. That's fine. That's why I put by agent's brokerage in here, so that a buyer that contests this form cannot disqualify the particular agent, because in theory, a buyer could contest this form and say, that agent was rude. That agent said something to me or my spouse or whatever. Whatever reason they can make up. But a brokerage is full of agents, and those agents could act as let's say you're the listing agent. Well, another agent could represent this buyer, and you could get even a referral fee. You could still be compensated for it. So the point is that you're saying, listen, you want to go unrepresented? That's fine by me. You're entitled to, and you've declared it. But what we're doing, and the between the lines conversation here is, if you are in discussion or if you're in talks with another agent and you don't have a BRBC form signed, and this agent's sending you to the listing agent to have the listing agent open up properties, and if you find a property you like, then you'll sign a BRBC with the agent. That is what you're eliminating. That's what you're trying to get rid of, because this will happen. You will have agents sending their buyers out and buyers pretending to be unrepresented only until they find a property they like. So you send this. That's it. It's as easy as that. Unrepresented, great. You want representation, you're going to use us. Now, is this legally enforceable? It's weak, but there is ground to stand on if you really got bent out of shape because you felt like a buyer exploited you, called you up. Because you as a listing agent, you have a fiduciary obligation to the seller to make the property available to prospective buyers. At the end of the day, you're a listing agent, you're trying to move an asset. You're trying to dispose of an asset on behalf of a client. That's what a listing agent is. By the way, the lawsuit totally missed the whole point of how listing an asset and sharing some of the commission works. But now here we are in this post-settlement world. So we have this document. Now, buyer's going to sign. You're going to put your information. Okay, many buyers are going to say, no, that's fine. We expect that. I have a solution. Here's what you're going to do. If a buyer rejects that document, because let me tell you something, by the way. This document right here, I'm going to email before my showing appointment. And I'm going to tell them this. Listen, you may have heard there's been a settlement. We have to be very careful about acknowledging that you are unrepresented. There's all sorts of protocol if you are to ever become unrepresented. So this is something that I'm sharing with you in full disclosure and transparency. However you want to present it, go for it. But I would say something like that. I would make it very official. I'd tell them over the phone. I'd email it to them. I'd text them, whatever. Now, if they get weird, actually, I'd send it through DocuSign. That's what I use. I would send this form through DocuSign. And I'd send it right away. I'd have a DocuSign template with this form in there. Oh, someone wants to see my listing and they're not coming during an open house. They're signing this form. That's it. And that is going to smoke out a lot of these people that are working with an agent, and the agent doesn't have them sign a BRBC and instead exploit the listing agent's time to open up properties for them, only for the lazy agent to write an offer later. Okay, so now let's say the buyer refuses. I don't have to sign anything. I just want to see the property. Are you preventing me from access? No, I'm not at all. Here, that's fine. That's fine. If they refuse, this is what you're going to send them. An unrepresented buyer advisory. You're going to text it to them. You're going to email it to them. You're going to print out on a piece of paper and hand it to them when you meet them right outside the front door. You give it to them whenever you can. You just make sure that you give it to them and it's documented. I'm going to read this very quickly. You, and this is speaking to the buyer, you have declared that you are an unrepresented interested party and have requested a property showing from the seller's brokerage. Underlined, you are not required to have a representative to purchase real estate. However, should you decide to be represented, I expect you to select my brokerage. Again, we're not saying me, because a buyer could be weird and say, well, that person was rude, or that person did something that offended me, or that person, okay, so a buyer can find a way to disqualify a single agent. But let me tell you as a broker, if a seller tries to get out of a listing agreement for some silly reason, and likely it's because some other agent is seducing them with nonsense. So if I feel like another agent's trying to steal a client and there's not a legitimate reason for a seller to back out, and that seller just calls my office and says, well, your agent did this and I don't like that, I'd say, that's fine. We have other agents. I mean, there are almost 300 agents at my brokerage to choose from. I'm sure we will find you someone suitable. That's the thing. We keep it in the brokerage. And you know what I do? I move it to another agent and I call the original agent up that was worried they were losing this listing. And I say, don't worry, another agent's taking over and you're going to be paid a referral fee. So that's the idea. That's why we're saying brokerage and not agent. Ideally, it would be the same agent, but someone might say, well, I'm not having the seller's representative represent me as well. I don't like dual agency. That's fine. We'll have a totally different person, and that person's going to be your personal contact. I'll continue. So I expect you to select my brokerage as we are performing broker services, that's a magical keyword from other forms, that would have otherwise been performed by your representative, and will take issue if another broker is selected. This is the most succinct way I could make this form because I wanted verbiage that if someone refuses signing the first form I showed you, text them this. And they'll say, what's this? Just a disclaimer. It's an advisory. You're unrepresented. You don't have to worry about it. This is for people that claim to be unrepresented, but are actually not unrepresented. Instead, they're going to elect representation from someone else that's too lazy or too weak to get a representation agreement signed. So they're exploiting listing agents. That's happening. Of course, you don't have to say all that baggage stuff. They don't need to hear that. They don't care. You can just say it's just an official advisory in case there's another agent that's trying to take advantage of the situation. I mean, whatever you want to say. And that's it. I will link to both of these, but let me give you a very quick summary on how to use it. You start by using the unrepresented buyer form. You go through it with them. You explain, I have to be careful. I can't enter a property with a buyer that's unrepresented, but working with me. If I'm working with a buyer, they must be represented. So we're just here officially recognizing that you're unrepresented. And if you happen to get represented later, that should be us. That's it. Now, how a buyer reacts, that's going to be very telling. You may want to walk away. If the buyer but remember, you still have the obligation to open up the property. So if the buyer politely refuses, they're totally entitled to refuse. They have no obligation to sign that form to enter your listing. You hit them with this, the unrepresented buyer advisory. You copy and paste this in a text message. You email it to them. You print it out on a piece of paper and you hand it to them. And that's it. And you let them know. And guess what? If they do, in fact, work with another agent, when they write an offer, I will contact the agent and say, I will go after you with an ethics claim, and I'll go after your buyer and make this a mess. So you need to come clean, and we need to figure this out. And that's how it works, because I'm telling you, as a broker that's been through literally thousands of transactions, I have seen countless times agents getting totally shafted and working for free because all these agents are working on spec. They don't get paid unless a deal closed. And there are so many people with licenses that are lazy and exploiting other people that are just diligently trying to offer a full service experience for clients out there. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Thank you for watching.